Hey guys, Sandy here. I know Mara didn't say it in her last video, but she talked to me in the chat room later and told me that my next challenge would be to talk to you all about abnormal psychology. And this really actually gets me excited because I have my bachelor's in psychology. So this is something that not only interests me, but I actually know something about it. And even though my degree is in general psychology, it's not specifically in abnormal psychology, it's still really neat because it was my favorite class while getting my degree. So shout out to Dr. Romano, thank you for being amazing and teaching me about awesome stuff. I want to start off by clearing the air a little bit. This is one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to psychology. Abnormal psychology does not necessarily mean crazy people. And that's the association that everybody makes in their mind, which is fine, but it's not true. I mean, it's not true. The definition of abnormal psychology is the branch of psychology that studies unusual patterns of behavior, emotion, and thought, which may or may not be associated with a mental disorder. And personally, I really do prefer the term disorder, not mental illness. Illness implies that you are sick, and it is something that you'll get over with enough soup and rest. Disorders aren't usually like that. And what determines if a person has a certain disorder is for them to go to a counseling session. And a psychologist in that case would speak to the person and try to figure out what their mental state is by looking up what they observe their symptoms to be, or what the patient tells them their symptoms are, in what's called the DSM. And let me quickly preface this by saying that, yes, psychologists may be doctors, but they still have to look things up because psychology is constantly evolving. What we know of the mind is constantly evolving. And being a psychologist means that you are continually learning. You are always learning about new things. And the DSM has been through like 10 different editions. It might be exaggerating, but it's been through several editions. You have to always evolve your theory and work around the circumstances that are in the case before you. Also, each case is very unique, and while two people may have the same disorder, it may not present itself in the same ways. So you still look at the different symptoms for the disorder, and maybe someone is showing only 3 symptoms, whereas someone else might show 5. Or they might both show 3, and they might be the different 3. Now, the DSM is the reference book that I have been referring to. It is actually called the DSM-4-TR, and it is the standard abnormal psychology and psychiatry reference book in North America. And DSM stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It lists a set of disorders and provides very detailed descriptions on what constitutes a disorder. So when I was in my abnormal psychology class in school, actually learning about all this stuff, we did have a copy of the DSM and we did have, of course, our textbook, but our teacher had a really unique way of teaching. Most people taking an abnormal psychology class are going to become psychologists and have to learn how to recognize these disorders that we're learning about. So what he would do was he would set up situations where we would have to recognize symptoms of these disorders. And one of the ways he did this was by watching a movie. The movie that we watched was called Mr. Jones. It has Richard Gere and Lena Olin. We would watch a scene, and he would pause it and say, okay, what symptoms do you see? If you had to diagnose at this point, what different disorders could this be? And it was a really interesting way to learn because we would treat the character in the movie like they would be a patient. And it made it almost real. It wasn't just theory, it was applying what we were learning. And really looking back at all this stuff makes this particular email that I got this week that much funnier. And and they shared a link with me that refers a lot to psychology and Christmas, and I'll put that link down in the doobly-doo below, so check that out. I'll also put a link down there referencing everything that I've been talking about from the DSM and the definitions of abnormal psychology and all that, so that you guys can have a little bit more to look at, because it's a lot to talk about in a 6-minute video, which would seem a long time. I put together all my stuff and it was like a 10-minute video and I had to cut it down, and it was like, oh, how am I going to do that? So for the next video, I'm going to challenge Cho, Sandseeker, and I want you to talk about movies. I don't care if you make a list of your top 10 movies, if you make a list of your favorite lines, or if you just want to talk about movies in general, but if you do make a list of something, I want to know why those particular films made it onto that list. So that is your challenge for next time, and until I am challenged again, this is Sandy signing off.